The Negroc Act of 1740. The Negroc Act of 1740 was legislature put into place to further halt the progression of enslaved African Americans due to the population growing and a result of a revolt that occurred the previous year, 1739. The revolt was called the Stono Rebellion. The Stono Rebellion occurred September 9, 1739 in South Carolina. It was a revolt of not a great size but a great significance led by a man named Jimmy. Here's a picture of Jimmy and what he was depicted as. Gathering many slaves to contribute to the uprising, they began their rebellion near the Stono River in the South Carolinas and marched towards the Spanish Florida. Whilst marching, seizing many weapons and using said weapons to kill around 20 to 25 white colonists, but unfortunately led to the deaths of 35 to 50 enslaved people. While yes, the rebellion was short-lived with not a huge number of casualties, this paved the way for the fears of many white colonists to raise the strictness of laws on enslaved people to protect themselves. The aftermath. While yes, the revolt was put to an end and the consequences had just begun, members of the Colonial Assembly and the governor at the time, Robert Johnson, were key factors in the formation of the laws that came to be. Some of the laws passed through the legislature were restricting movement, additionally making it mandatory for slaves to have written approval to travel around the colonies. For any reason, which in turn made it more difficult to gather or organize an escape plan with other enslaved people or even orchestrating a revolt with freed black individuals. Prohibiting assembly of more than 7 people at a time once again made planning any type of uprising almost impossible. This made the learning process even more difficult because those enslaved who had the skill to fluently read and write were forbidden to, and those who could congregate with others made the communication barrier even more of an obstacle. There were even restrictions on the militia. While originally enslaved people were often drafted first to fight for wars and many conflicts, they were no longer an option for the military power. Their ability to carry firearms were restricted, but all this to instill the notion that challenging the power of the white colonists and slave masters was an absolute no. Severe punishment for behaviors deemed necessary by the slave masters, which often meant mutilation for many slaves, often death as well, with little insight given by the government to control the punishment given out. The abuse was astronomical. Through the strong government action push from the legislature made systems of racial control and repression in South Carolina. The law made it more difficult for enslaved people to resist their condition, whether through the revolt, escape, or social solidarity. It also reinforced the racial hierarchy that underpinned the entire system of slavery in the South, categorizing Africans and African Americans as permanent inferior members of society. In conclusion, the Negroc Act of 1740 was a direct response to the threat posed by the Stono Rebellion and a growing enslaved African population in South Carolina. It represented an effort to tighten the system of slavery, restrict the movement and rights of enslaved people, and further prevent the uprisings. The Act's provisions and long-lasting effects of both the enslaved population and the society of South Carolina, solidifying a system